I've talked a number of times about this observation that the public support for Ukraine is wavering from the protest class. And that you look at major sporting events, you look at major protests, and you look at the fact that these blue and yellow flags, or even red and black ones, have disappeared completely in favour of Palestinian ones mainly. The last night at the Proms is a very, kind of traditional thing, but the UK viewers or people who can watch the BBC would have been able to watch this online. There are videos out there, if you look for them, showing this year's last night at the Proms from the Royal Albert Hall. Now, traditionally, what happens is everyone sort of gets dressed up, gussied up, and well, seen as a bunch of toffs acting like commoners for a night. But they wave flags and have party poppers and party hats and sing along and all this sort of stuff. But what was interesting, and out of this year's last night of the Proms, there's always a couple of pieces where everyone sings along and waves the flags, and Rule Britannia. They don't wave the flags during the national anthem, but Rule Britannia, Land of Hope and Glory, definitely. Jerusalem. I've always felt that when the sounds of Elgar come stirring from the Royal Albert Hall, nations across the world tremble because it's the sound of empire coming for them again. But this year, there was a protest during the last week of the Proms against the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, who had issues with a Israeli pianist here in Australia, and there were pro-Palestinian protesters in the Royal Albert Hall that actually interrupted the program, not the schedule, the program. They were removed and the program recommenced, but that wasn't last night at the Proms. So I got to see, I saw footage of this year's last night of the Proms, particularly Land of Hope and Glory in Jerusalem, and they show the audience because they're the two main audience participation pieces, and they're busy waving flags like crazy. What stood out was the breakdown of all the flags. There's a lot of Union flags, so UK flags. There are a ton of EU flags. Now, the EU flags were handed out by political campaigners outside the Royal Albert Hall, and for some reason were allowed in. There were Welsh, Scottish, the occasional Northern Ireland flag. Not so many England flags. Certainly there were Union flags, so UK flags. There were Dutch flags. There were German flags. There were no Palestinian flags. And there was one Ukrainian flag. There were more Australian flags being waved in the audience the last night of the Proms than there were Ukrainian flags. So take a read on what the sort of audience that is. Now, you go back and look at, say, 2022, 2023. Yeah, the flag composition will be much different. But it's just the latest example. And when was it? Last week. It was 13th of September. So last month, 2 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago now. Yeah, another recent example of an event where you'd expect to see this breakdown of different flags. You're now seeing an evaporation of public support or concern. It doesn't hold the mind of the public like it once did. Ukraine's lost part of the support base it had and should really be considering peace, because it doesn't look like the support's coming back.